Well, we've been enjoying quite a heat wave here in London for the last week or so, and the last thing I wanted to do was make a video. I certainly didn't expect to be talking about Saudi Arabia again so quickly, but my last video about that country being a gay volcano on the brink of eruption got quite a heated response from a few people there, including violent threats and other abuse. I guess it must have touched a nerve, a big old gay nerve. And I suppose that's understandable. Anyone who lives in a country where they execute gay people is bound to get a little jumpy when somebody rattles the closet door. And believe me, boys, I sympathise. And this is why I've always thought it was a great idea to put a gay bar next to the proposed Ground Zero Mosque in New York, if it ever gets built. Then when Saudi clerics go over there to preach violent jihad, they can drop in next door and dip their wick between hate sermons. Of course, they'd need to have a private door installed between the two buildings so that they could maintain their religious and cultural integrity by doing it, as usual, in secret. Now, although Saudi Arabia has a worldwide reputation as a gay country, they do execute gay people there, so you wouldn't expect too many of them to be coaxed out of the closet, no matter how many millions may be crammed in there. At least not until they'd had a clear lead from somebody with absolute religious authority, like the Grand Mufti, perhaps, or one of his boyfriends. If one of those guys was honest enough to come out as gay, to acknowledge the culture that actually exists and not the fantasy one they want us all to believe exists, I bet the floodgates would open and they'd all be at it. Even the religious police wouldn't interfere. They'd be too busy sewing their costumes for the Mecca Pride Parade. Muslims only, of course. You see, many of those guys have done time in prison, so they're happy to keep the sexes apart, they just can't keep their hands off each other. But look, I don't want to overdo this whole Saudi gay thing here. It's good for a few laughs up to a point, but there are plenty of worse things about Saudi Arabia than sexual hypocrisy, like the untold billions they're pumping into worldwide jihad, for example, funding hardline madrasas and hate-preaching mosques and creeping Sharia throughout the Western world. Also, the Americans tell us that the Saudi Arabians are the world's leading source of terrorist funding. And this is because, although we in the West are not at war with Islam, Wahhabi Islam, the batshit crazy one with all the money, is very much at war with us, only we're too stupid to see it. It's a war of attrition that they intend to win by taking full advantage of the thing they most despise and would abolish if they could, freedom of religion. Don't bother being a Christian in Saudi Arabia. Your religion is against the law there, and if you're stupid enough to start preaching it, you could be executed in public. Meanwhile, thousands of Saudi-funded mosques are being built all over the free world, and even when they're publicly shown to be preaching misogyny, homophobia, anti-Semitism and violence, nothing is ever done about it because that might cause offence. Indeed, here in Britain, the people who report it are more likely to be arrested as criminals. Also, as most people know by now, the Saudi regime is a leading light in the Islamic campaign to stamp out free speech at the United Nations and introduce a worldwide blasphemy law. However, after decades of Islamic phony grievance mongering, not to mention the cowardly connivance of Western politicians eager to pass laws that silence their own citizens, people in the West are finally waking up to just how essential free speech is to our survival as a free society, and also to the realization that this is precisely why the Islamic dictatorships are attacking it. It's not because they're offended about anything. Believe me, they are not that sensitive. They're doing it because they know that if they can neutralize freedom of speech, the guts will have been ripped out of Western civilization and our society will rot and decay from within. Indeed, the process is already visibly underway in several European countries where people have been prosecuted as criminals for holding legitimate, non-violent opinions and for telling the truth. And this is why every freedom-loving person in the West should be absolutely determined that the Islamic war on free speech will never ever be allowed to succeed, not by 1 inch, not at any price, not now and not in a million years, not even in the length of time it would take for the entire country of Saudi Arabia to pass sand grain by sand grain through an egg timer, which is all it'll be fit for when we find an alternative to oil and stop the oil companies from sabotaging it. And many of us here in the free world that's the civilized world, to you boys in Saudi, are hoping that day arrives very soon indeed. Free speech means being able to express an honest opinion, in case you didn't know. And my honest opinion is that Wahhabi Islam is such an obvious mental affliction that science ought to be looking for a cure. It's a truly horrible, heartless and cruel ideology that despises humankind, especially the female half, and I believe its presence on this planet is a stain on all humanity. And when it finally passes, as one day it surely must, because nothing that unnatural and inhuman could possibly last forever, its memory will linger like a bad smell as a warning for generations to come, like a ghostly gibbet by the roadside of history, a bony finger of death beckoning us back to a more brutal and primitive past. It'll serve as a grim reminder of what happens to human beings when religion is allowed to go too far. Peace, if you want it. If not, you can shove it up your camel's hump, with all due respect.